Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Interview Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com, FocusedHealthyFamily.com, and of course, InvisibleWheelchair.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair interviews, I get the wonderful chance to interview some of the experts with obsessive-compulsive disorders, professionals that treat OCD, people who are going through or have been through OCD, parents and caregivers of those suffering from OCD, and of course anyone that advocates for treatment of OCD. My goal of these interviews is to inform people on all aspects of OCD and bring about awareness of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Please remember that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these interviews are not necessarily the views and opinions of myself, Family OCD, Focused Healthy Family, and Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. You can find out more about me at FamilyOCD.com, FocusedHealthyFamily.com, and InvisibleWheelchair.com. This podcast interview was recorded August 12, 2017. I'm so excited I have the privilege of having Wayne Connell, the founder, president, and CEO of Invisible Disabilities Association, on the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. Wayne established IDA back in 1996 out of a desire to educate friends and family about his wife's debilitating illness. Soon afterwards, people around the globe began sending emails sharing how IDA had changed their relationships with their loved ones. He has co-authored a book, But You Look Good, How to Encourage and Understand People Living with Illness and Pain. Wayne's background fueled his passion for helping people living with illness, pain, and disability. His experience includes that of a professional, multitasking husband caregiver with an extensive background in management, media, and technology. This man on a mission quickly launched IDA into a worldwide outreach for millions living with invisible disabilities. Make sure to check out IDA's website for additional resources and stories at www.invisibledisabilities.org. Now, let's get to that interview. Well, Wayne, I want to thank you for being part of this and welcome you to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm so pleased that you're able to do this for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
What I'd like to start out with, Wayne, if we could, is your story about how you got this organization going and maybe a little bit of the personal part of it, too, if you could.
Yeah, so really my story goes back to when I met my wife back in 1992, the year before she was diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis and permanently disabled at the age of 27. We met in 92 when she was 28, and you wouldn't know by looking at her that she had a disability because she was walking, but she was in pain from head to toe and unable to work. That same year, she was also diagnosed with Lyme disease, which we can trace back to when she was 14 years old, 14 years before that, and been bit by a tick, and we really believe that was a big cause in her illness journey. We got married in 94, which was obviously a great occasion in my life. And in 1996, she came up with the phrase invisible disabilities to describe herself and what she was going through. And it made a lot of sense. We would park in disabled parking and people would scream at us. And she's like, I have an invisible disability. And I said, wow, that really makes sense. Well, so she had written a couple of pamphlets. She wrote a little pamphlet called Don't Judge by Appearances, which was really about parking in disabled parking or handicapped parking. She wrote a little pamphlet about multiple sclerosis, and I'm kind of a techie guy by background, with a background in anything that has to do with electronics and data communications. And I said, well, why don't we put up a website? This was in, why don't we put up a website so people can learn more about it? And so people are always asking, what's MS? What are you going through? I don't understand why, you're not in a wheelchair. How are you disabled? They were always asking all these questions. And so we said, we'll take some of your writings, and we put it up on a website, and we launched the website in 1997 called Invisible Disabilities. Advocate is what we originally called it, and really an advocate was somebody who came alongside. What we didn't know is that 20 to 25,000 people from around the world would visit the site almost immediately. We were just overwhelmed, and what happened is that people said that they, we put into words what they were trying to tell their friends and family. It was, it was quite of an amazing journey, and it was a very simple website. But what I believe nowadays is that the internet had only been around about 3 years at the time, but people who were living with disabilities and invisible disabilities, a lot of them were homebound because of their illness and very isolated. And so I believe that they were early adopters of the internet, and they really, as soon as they, the internet came about, they gave them a window to the world, and that was one of the reasons why they found us on the internet. Well, kind of the next stage in our lives and in the organization is that we wrote the book But You Look Good. Really compiled some more of Sherry's writings, and the book But You Look Good is really about how to encourage and educate somebody living with an invisible disability or illness and pain, because what people would always say is I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, and they didn't know, so they would either not say anything or they'd say something that would come across hurtful. And so that's what the book is about, is kind of what to say, what not to say. It gives examples of things that we might say that might come across that we think we're saying is nice, but for the person with an invisible disability, it's coming across that we don't believe them. For example, I'll just give you a quick example here. If somebody says I'm dealing with an illness and I'm really tired, the other person may be hearing something a little bit different, and what they may say is, well, I'm tired too. But what they're really meaning is they're tired because they went to work all day, and then they took the kids to the park, and then they went to the zoo, and then they went to the theater, and then they had a late night, and so they're tired because they did a bunch of things. Versus the person with the invisible disability, they're exhausted from being ill and having to just make it through the day, and sometimes they're so exhausted that they can't even sleep, and so what they feel like is that comparison it disregards what they're going through. And so book really helped in that area. We've sent over 30,000 of those books around the world now, and watched them really change families and organizations and people and relationships. And then in 2004, we incorporated it as a 501c3 nonprofit. And then that started really kicking off the organization's journey. I do want to go back 1 second, and a time frame is also back in '98, we launched a thing called Yahoo Groups, which was basically like an online support group, which was really a place for people to talk about their illnesses, and that has grown and changed and become a kind of a mainstay of the organization as well.
Well, Wayne, all of that I can feel in my heart, because I've a lot of that kind of stuff I've been through in my own life. So thank you for that. Can you define for me a little bit of what you consider, or how you consider, an invisible disability?
Sure. So, well, first thing is, let me define a little bit about the term disability itself. There's kind of a legal definition or a practical definition of disability. It's often described as a physical challenge or mental illness, or it's basically something that impairs your life's activities. It can be neurological. There's a whole different host of things. And what makes a disability invisible or an illness invisible is the fact that you can't see it. Now, what's very interesting about that is it's not just limited to illnesses such as, bipolar disorder, or people that have, they're dealing with all kinds of things that are happening. Epilepsy, obviously this podcast we're talking about OCD is one of them. There's phobias. There's a whole host of things that are happening in the brain, traumatic brain injury and PTSD and those things. But it also impacts a whole host of other things where somebody might even have a visible symptoms of their illness where you might be able to see a limp, or you might be able to see they're in a wheelchair, or you might be able to notice that there's some slurring in their speech or whatever that is. But it's the invisible things behind that. A person may be in a wheelchair, and a wheelchair doesn't necessarily limit somebody. If you're in a wheelchair, you can play rugby, you can play basketball, you can do sled hockey, you can work in a wheelchair. If you're at a desk, it doesn't limit it. But what if you have chronic pain? What if you have PTSD? It's really those invisible symptoms that what we call an invisible disability. So it's very a broad set of and so that's why we don't even focus on a specific illness as an organization, because there's thousands and thousands of different things that are impacted. But it's those invisible things that other people don't see, that they don't understand, and that's the tough part, is trying to get them to believe that it's real when they can't see it.
Yeah, and that's what I've experienced in my own life with my daughter. If you saw her during her really her worst time, you wouldn't be able to tell what was really going on in that mind. So, and I like the way you classify even visible disabilities into that definition. And I'd ask if you could just expound on that a little bit more, because I want to understand how you see visible disabilities within invisible disabilities.
Well, it's really tied to those symptoms, like I said. So, like I said, we see somebody in a wheelchair, and our assumption is that we know everything about them because of their wheelchair. But what if they're dealing with diabetes, right? And that's an aspect we don't understand. We don't understand how you may be able to eat something this time and not eat something this time, or we don't understand how maybe they have peripheral neuropathy, which we can't see, and they can't feel their feet, or what, so the reason why they're in a wheelchair is because it's a balance issue, right? Because of peripheral neuropathy. We don't know, we make so many assumptions when we see things like a wheelchair, right? Because the universal symbol is a wheelchair. Our ultimate dream would be to have the invisible disability symbol really clarify all disabilities. And that way, it's pretty obvious when somebody's in a wheelchair that they have a disability. But the difficulty is all the non-obvious people that, 70 to 80% of the people that have a severe disability don't use any kind of assistive device. They don't use canes or crutches or wheelchairs. So you don't know. So if you imagine how many people that actually don't use a wheelchair, that percentage has got to be, higher than that, because some of those people just use a cane or, a crutch or something, versus being in a wheelchair full time. So, but our symbol's a wheelchair, right? So this is the difficulty we run into, is that people see that symbol and they say, well, you must not be disabled. My wife has multiple sclerosis, and one of the first things that people always ask is she in a wheelchair? And their assumption is that a wheelchair tells you the extent of an illness. It doesn't. When somebody has multiple sclerosis, if their lesions are on their spine where it impacts their ability to walk, then they're in a wheelchair. But if their lesions are in a different place on their spine and it doesn't impact their ability to walk necessarily, then that doesn't mean that the extent is any better or worse. And so this is one of the things that we struggle with, is that people always want to compare. My friend has MS, they're in a wheelchair, you have MS, you're not in a wheelchair, then there's a difference. Autism has done really good on this. Autism they call it an autism spectrum disorder. And what they mean by that is that it's on a spectrum. And every illness truly is on a spectrum. And we can't make assumptions because somebody has a specific illness that they have to be a certain way. And as you probably have noticed, that there's a lot of people that have multiple illnesses. High percentage. And they're impacted. If somebody might have MS and arthritis, and so they're different than somebody who has MS and diabetes, right? And just that whole interaction of those things. And so when it comes to believability, you were mentioning your daughter, one of the difficulty things people have is that one moment a person may be able to go to an event, maybe go to a dinner, and the next night they can't, and people don't understand that. They think,
Yeah.
well, you just want to come to my dinner.
Yeah.
They don't understand that illnesses ebb and flow as well, and sometimes it's moment to moment how people are going to be able to interact.
I'm glad that you have defined that in your site, because I had never really thought about it that way, and I think the same thing for people out there. They don't think about the multitude of things somebody can be going through, no matter if they're standing or they're in a wheelchair. Thank you for that. Just a quick little thing. I actually have your site up here, and I just noticed the laugh out loud. How does that play into? That's part of your gala, it looks like.
Right. So yeah, our gala this year is actually called Laugh Out Loud, and it really ties back to one of our advisory board members is a lady named Karen Buxman, and you can find a lot of resources on our website. She's been everything from a keynote speaker for us to we hosted a couple of years of brain symposiums. And Karen is what she calls a neurohumorist. She's actually one of the top speakers in the nation on therapeutic humor, and it's really talking about the whole aspect of how humor plays a huge role in people's journeys with illness, and that what she even talks about is not a matter of having to be funny, but it's actually a matter of seeing funny and how you can see funny throughout the day. And she even calls it a toolkit of you got to kind of prepare ahead of time when you're going to go through the difficult things. And so humor is one of those things that you can use to prepare that. We will, as a family, my wife and I, we love comedy. We watch a lot of, we watched every I Love Lucy rerun. I know I'm speaking being an old guy here talking about I Love Lucy, but even, it's humor that can actually help so much in an illness. Because think about it, illnesses can be so depressing. I mean, and it's truly depressing from not only a clinical standpoint, but the fact that you got to deal with it every day. They can also be depressing from the sense that you're going through loss of who you were. When you become ill, you go through the stage of grieving, and so you're dealing with that. So humor becomes not a humor of making fun of somebody dealing with an illness, because as Karen would say, the only person you can make fun of is yourself. But it's not about making fun of yourself. It's about seeing the funny humor. And when you get a chance to, if you get a chance to check out her, and I would recommend that people go online and really go to our website, and, they can just look up Karen, Karyn, Buxman, Buxman, and you'll find her stuff all over our website. In fact, Karen's going to actually be at our gala, and she's going to be sharing with us a lot about that therapeutic humor as well. But you're right. It is about, laughing out loud, and people think, how can you laugh when you're in the middle of illness? Well, because sometimes illness can be really funny in the sense of what we're going through. And sometimes it's just the absurdity of it. It's like, you're kidding, another shoe's going to drop, right? We talk about that phrase, right? And sometimes sometimes it's the interaction with the doctor, and you think, all you can do is laugh because it's so absurd that this doctor does not get it whatsoever, right? And so humor does play such a huge part, and as an organization, we've chosen to really be part of that as well.
Well, I agree with that totally. If you don't laugh, you end up crying, and and not that crying is bad, but laughing is a good healer too. So, the last question I really have for you is, what is it your association really wishes to mold or change out there? What I guess the goal, maybe the purpose, if you want to put it that way.
Well, so let me tell you quickly our mission and our vision of the organization real quick. So our mission is to encourage, educate, and connect people and organizations touched, and touch means a person with the illness and caregivers touched by illness, pain, and disability. So we really want to encourage people. We want to educate them. We do that through our website. We want to connect them. We have a site called Invisible Disabilities Community. That goes back to that Yahoo groups I was telling you earlier. We've got a real vibrant community. There's about 6,000 people on that, and you can access that through the website. And it's a way for people to get together and talk about what they're going on through. But our vision is that we would envision a world where people living with illness, pain, and disability would be invisible no more. And you'll see that as a huge theme through our organization. There's going to be some campaigns coming up around that. But what invisible no more means is that we would treat everybody the same, no matter if they have an illness or not. and that we would believe people when people say, this is what I'm dealing with. We would stop and listen to them. And so Invisible No More is really about that. And so that's what our goal is, to change society's perception about disabilities and illness, and stop blaming people and stop treating people like they're second-class people. You know, I always call the most abnormal people in the world are people who run Ironman triathlons. That's abnormal. Most of us can't do that.
Yeah.
And so the rest of us are truly normal. And, you know, speaking of humor, you know, I heard a great little phrase. Somebody said, normal is a setting on the washing machine, right? That's truly what normal is, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean even on the washing machine? You're like, what is normal, right? Normal is that we're all going through difficulties in our lives, and we're all going to suffer from pain, disappointment, and struggle, and disabilities. Diseases are going to get us all eventually. I mean, the reality is that's what's going to happen, but that's what we go through in life. And so if we could believe people and we could not judge them, you know, like our pamphlet, Don't Judge by Appearances, and we could not prejudge them, and we could say, you know what, this is part of our society. I mean, we're all one step away from getting an illness, right? So we need to understand that we can treat people the same, and if we did that, it would help people in their health. There's even a thing called the care effect, and you know, we don't have time to kind of go into this, but you can learn about how caring for somebody helps them in their illness if you believe them, right? I mean, you would understand that in your practice.
Yeah,
you know, it's the way you treat people. They feel like they're not people anymore, and they are. And if that's really the bottom line for our organization, that they would be invisible no more, and that we would believe them and care for them.
No, I agree totally with that. That's beautiful. Wayne, if you could share with how people can find out more about this, can you give us a little more details of where they can contact, all that?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to go to invisibledisabilities.org, which is our main website. We are on all social media that's out there just about, and you can also, the buttons to all the social media are on both the top of our site and the bottom of our site. Definitely go to our YouTube, Invisible Disabilities YouTube. You can find an incredible resource of hundreds of videos that we have put up. You know, you can even find videos, you know, Mandy Harvey, who was on America's Got Talent this year, 2017. Mandy was our headliner at our gala last year, and she lives an invisible disability of being entirely deaf, but she sings.
Oh, I saw that.
You can find some of her videos. But you can find videos from Karen Buxman. You can find videos from a lot of our honorees. We've honored almost 100 people over the last 10 years. And you can hear their stories. They'll share their stories as they receive their awards. There's a lot of personal stories on there. There's, you know, and then we have what's coming up in October. Not only do we have our gala on October 21st here in Denver, but we also have Invisible Disabilities Week. And this year will be the 4th year that we're celebrating that. It's the 3rd week in October. We want people to get their invisible wristbands, which we have available. Celebrate it that week. We'll be talking about, you know, how you can share your story that week. But it's a way to say, hey, we are real. We're not invisible anymore.
Well, that is great. I will remind listeners that will be up on the invisiblewheelchair.com site, also my Family OCD site, more than likely. Wayne, I really want to thank you. It's been a joy to talk with you, and I appreciate all the wonderful information. I hope this is something that's going to be helpful and make the awareness spread even further. So I really appreciate you being on with us, and I thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure.
This concludes this podcast. Please remember to leave comments for me, because that really helps me to understand what you're looking for and helps give me fodder for the next possible podcast. Also, I'd love to hear your invisible wheelchair story if you're willing to share it. If you are, feel free to go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. Now, if you've heard these things and you feel like you need further assistance or some help in what you're going through, and you want to spend some time with me working through those issues, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or simply call me at 704-562-1630. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life into new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.